Georgia's coast has numerous sounds, rivers, and inlets. These served as highways for shipping and commerce from the earliest European settlements, and securing them was vital. In the 18th and 19th centuries, points of high ground and other strategic locations along Georgia's coast became sites for a series of forts designed to protect and defend the region. In 1721, English soldiers from the South Carolina colony built Fort King George.
I'm currently standing on the lower bluff of the Altamaha River. This area had long been occupied by Wally Native Americans and later by Spanish missionaries. By the 1600s, this area had been abandoned following conflicts between the Wally and the Spanish. Colonel John Barnwell saw this as an opportunity to expand their British territory.
Three days by boat from Charleston, Fort King George was the southernmost British outpost at the time that it was built. France, Great Britain, and Spain all competed for the land here at the mouth of the Altamaha River. At the time, France and Spain lacked the resources to take this land, putting the British at the upper hand, controlling the southern coast.
Though there were no battles during the 6-year occupation of this fort, 147 soldiers lost their lives. Disease, malnutrition, and sweltering heat made it tough to survive. In 1727, the fort was shut down for good, but it had been successful in giving the British a claim on this land.
Near the spot where Fort King George once stood, General James Oglethorpe settled his second city in Darien. Scottish Highlanders were placed in houses similar to this. They were very influential in the protection of the young colony, including its battle of Bloody Mark. Following the decline of the military use at Fort King George, the Scottish Highlanders remained here in the area of Darien. They set up sawmills. It lasted for almost 200 years. The lumber industry made Darien what it is today. Throughout our site, you'll find evidence of all the different periods of the sawmilling industry from the 1740s all the way through to the 1920s.
The colony of Georgia was established in 1733, and by the 1770s, it had a thriving coastal area with Savannah and the town of Sunbury as its principal ports. Sunbury, as Georgia's second largest port, needed protection with the coming of the American Revolution.
Greetings! Today we are here at Fort Morris Historic Site, which guarded the colonial seaport town of Sunbury beginning in the year 1758. Prior to that, this land was occupied by the Wally American Indians. The Spaniards, who built a series of missions here along the Georgia coast, had the main mission to these Indians just offshore here on St. Catherine's Island, about 7 nautical miles east. The Spanish had a mission on the coastal island of St. Catherine's called Santa Catalina de Wale, which was the main mission to the Indians here along the coast. And the story of the town of Sunbury begins in the year 1758 when Captain Mark Carr lays out a town site with intersecting streets and lanes, which created 496 lots and 3 public squares called Church Square, King Square, and Meeting Square. 5 wharves along the Medway River lined the east side of the town. There was a customs house, taverns, eventually a school, and many people who would go on to have great influence in the colony as well as the nation were associated here. 3 signers of the American Declaration of Independence, Lyman Hall, Button Gwinnett, and George Walton were here and associated with the town of Sunbury. Construction on what was to become Fort Morris began in earnest in the year 1776. It was an earthen fortress built on the bluff overlooking the town, the River Medway, as well as St. Catherine Sound. Savannah was captured in December of 1778, and the British military commanders set their sights on Sunbury soon after. Although the fort was never tested by a British ship attack, it was overwhelmed and captured by a heavy artillery barrage in early January 1779. Sunbury was the last American coastal outpost to fall after Savannah. While Savannah has of course developed into the main international seaport for the modern state of Georgia, the town of Sunbury has declined almost to the point of obscurity. This is due to many factors, some of which were the town's partial destruction by fire during the British occupation in the American Revolutionary War, but also the fact that there was never a railroad line extended here during the 19th century, whereas there were many rail lines leading into neighboring Savannah and Brunswick.
Following the Revolution, the state of Georgia continued to grow, but in the 1860s, the drums of war again came to Georgia's coast during the American Civil War. The war pitted the federal government against the newly formed Confederate states, and Georgia's coast was vulnerable to attack from the sea. Fort McAllister was built on the Ogeechee River to defend against attacks from federal ships.
Deep waters of the great Ogeechee River held access to the southern plantations, railroads, and local access routes. It was also the back door to the southern port city of Savannah. Savannah, Georgia's oldest and largest city at that time, was home to one of the busiest ports in the southeast. The Confederacy lacked the manufacturing capability of the North, making trade with other nations imperative to sustain the Southern war machine. Within the first 2 months of the war, military commanders, realizing the strategic significance the Ogeechee River Basin held, commissioned the construction of what would eventually become the 24-gun fortification. The earthen fort would be constructed on a high bluff called Genesis Point and would be named after a local landowner, Joseph A. McAllister.
For 4 long years, Fort McAllister stood guard the Ogeechee River Basin and Ossabaw Sound. The Union Navy attacked the fort several times with conventional wooden gunboats with little to no effect. In 1863, the Union Navy decided to test Fort McAllister with the most advanced weapon of war in existence at that time, the Passaic-class warships. These impenetrable ironclad warships were armed with some of the largest weapons fired during the war. As many as 4 of these vessels engaged the fort at close range multiple times. This was the first time these weapons had been used against a land fortification. Accounts describe these battles as some of the most impressive, large-scale artillery displays of the war. Although both the fort and the warships sustained numerous direct hits, damage and casualties were minimal, and the battles ended in a stalemate. These battles garnered worldwide acclaim and served as a reference to naval commanders the world over.
After the departure of the Union forces in the spring of 1863, the fort fell silent. But this all changed in December 1864. Union forces under the command of William T. Sherman had finally made their way to the Georgia coast. The final battle of Sherman's infamous March to the Sea was fought at Fort McAllister. Sherman's force, the 4,000-man-strong 2nd Division, positioned themselves around McAllister and on December 13, 1864, began to engage the fort. Numerous times the sides exchanged fire with each other in a series of skirmishes. The fort held its own for several hours. One Union soldier said, "Due to unparalleled resistance, it seemed the fort would win the day." But eventually superior numbers would prevail. Late in the afternoon, Union forces were able to swarm the fort, overpowering the small garrison in a short and bloody battle. Now, with McAllister's guns silent, Sherman's forces were able to rest and resupply. Just a few days later, the Union Army was able to march into Savannah without resistance. On Christmas Day, 1864, Sherman sent the telegram to President Lincoln that said, "I beg to present you as a Christmas gift the city of Savannah."
After the Civil War concluded, the fort and Genesis Point lay abandoned and were allowed to become overgrown for decades until Henry Ford, industrialists, bought the property and launched an extensive renovation project. That project was later turned over to the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, where it has been continued until this day. Fort McAllister, the guardian of the Ogeechee River, where naval history was made and General Sherman's march to the sea ended, continues to stand guard.
For 2 centuries, these bastions of earth and wood stood sentinel over Georgia's changing landscape. Today, these historic forts teem with wildlife and the sounds of people enjoying time outdoors. But in those quiet moments of reflection, one can still hear the echoing of drum beats from a time long ago.